Top 10 waiver wire stashes ahead of week 13. And this is an interesting one because there are no buys in week 13. Finally, because I gotta tell you, I am struggling to fill my rosters this week. This is a rough bye week for me, but finally we get a break next week. So the list is gonna be less focused on guys that can fill in for you and more focused on guys who could be on the cusp of an upward swing. Plus, we are going to talk about some playoff stashes, so stick around to the end of the video. As always, you know the drill. Our goal here is to get ahead of the game and get a jump on your league mates. We are predicting players that could be the top waiver wire ads on Tuesday and snagging them now for free so that you don't have to spend all your fab or whatever is left of it or your waiver wire priority to get them. Let's beat the waiver wire together. Bryce Young and the Panthers had an absolute field day in Week 11 against Atlanta. Young completed 31 of 45 attempts for 448 yards and 3 touchdowns. The biggest beneficiary was obviously Tataroa McMillan in a fantastic game with 8 receptions on 12 targets for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. But we should also note that Xavier Legette had a really good day there. He had 4 receptions on 8 targets for 83 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Coker also had a fine day, catching all 4 of his targets for 52 yards and a 2-point conversion. Now, Coker did end up having the higher snap count and running more routes, but that was probably related to Xavier Legette exiting the game early with an injury. Now, you guys know that I love Jalen Coker, but I can admit that Xavier Legette is the ultimately higher upside play between the two here. And while 45 attempts is definitely on the higher end for any quarterback and not something that we should expect moving forward every single week, it is reasonable to expect an increase in pass volume from the Panthers after this level of performance. So we are stashing Bryce Young and Xavier Legette in case we do see a permanent increase in passing volume. The Panthers have been very intentional about trying to lean on the ground game this season and limiting Bryce Young's passing volume. So the result, even in great matchups, has typically been games with less than 200 passing yards. For example, against Miami, a very good matchup, Young completed 19 of 30 attempts for 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, but only 198 yards. In Week 6 against Dallas, obviously, back then, a fantastic matchup. He only had 25 attempts, completed 17 of them for 199 yards and 3 touchdowns and 1 interception. So those were good games. They just weren't high volume games. So this is not a case like Justin Fields where Fields simply can't throw the ball, right? This is just that the Panthers have been limiting pass volume, and it's making the pass catchers just a little bit unreliable, unfortunately, on a consistent basis there. But when they actually allow him to throw the ball, the result is great from a fantasy perspective. Now, this week's matchup against San Francisco, it is a good test at this point. We all know that San Francisco's defense, unfortunately, is not quite itself due to all the injuries, and they are allowing extreme volume. Now, the overall numbers undersell just how significant the problems are in terms of volume that they are allowing, because it includes earlier games in the season before all their superstars got injured. But to put it in perspective, since week 5, San Francisco has allowed a minimum of 241 passing yards to opposing quarterbacks with the exception of Jackson Dart. In those 7 games over that time period, they have allowed a whopping 16 passing touchdowns in 7 games. Now, next week, the Panthers face the Rams. Obviously, we know that that is a difficult matchup that can result in a ridiculous amount of interceptions, as shown by Sam Darnold last week, but it is a matchup that forces opposing teams to throw aggressive volume regardless of how many interceptions they throw, because they are extremely difficult to run on and their offense is excellent. So that would be a game where we would also likely see increased volume for Bryce Young and Xavier Legette. Kayshon Boutte is back. We love him. He is a very interesting stash candidate. Now, Boutte has been on a roll prior to his injury back in Week 9. In the prior 3 games prior to that injury, Kayshon Boutte was wide receiver 4, wide receiver 20, and wide receiver 10 in half PPR. And that was a good mix of matchups. One that can be difficult in terms of New Orleans, one layup matchup against Tennessee, and then one of the league's most difficult matchups in Cleveland. We have talked about the Patriots receiving core quite a bit this season. I have grown to feel more comfortable with the receivers here. And that is because Drake May's volume earlier was favoring more of the tight ends, and now he has tilted it back towards the receivers, and they're becoming just more reliable as a whole here. This will be very interesting to see how Kayshon Boutte's return affects the receiving core, because there has been a clear shift in touchdowns for Stephon Diggs in Kayshon Boutte's absence and a clear shift in volume for Mac Hollins in Kayshon Boutte's absence. Now, the great news is that we have an excellent matchup here against Cincinnati, which should provide ample volume for all of the receivers. And Kayshon Boutte practiced in full this week, so in theory, that means that we should not see any limitations on him. He is an excellent stash because week 13, the matchup against the Giants is arguably even better than this matchup against Cincinnati. Then we have, unfortunately, a bye in week 14. That is definitely a bummer. But after that, they get a Buffalo team that is very agreeable to the pass. Then they get a Baltimore team that has pulled itself together defensively, but obviously does lean more towards pass encouraging. And then a great week 17 matchup against the Jets. We've got another stash duo here, but this one is different. It is not different positions. It is the same position. We are trying to figure out which receiver we want to roster. I will not bury the lead here. If you guys know me, if you follow me, you know that my preference is going to be Chimere Dike in terms of overall upside. Since the exit of Tyler Lockett, Chimere Dike has ascended into a more prominent role, and he was on a nice little hot streak before getting injured in Houston, resulting in him playing only 27% of snaps. But he is healthy this week, and Alec Ayamater is not, and Calvin Ridley is done for the season. So that leaves Van Jefferson and Chimere Dike. Dike ascending to the wide receiver 1 just makes logical sense. And if he does, next week's matchup against Jacksonville is very pass friendly. Now, Jefferson and Dike have played in tandem for a little bit, and we've seen enough, a little small sample size, to say that Dike is definitely the higher performer between the two when all things are equal in terms of snap counts and targets. And Van Jefferson, to his credit, he is coming off a productive day in week 11 against Houston. He had 3 receptions on 7 targets for a touchdown. But again, that was heavily related to injuries that were suffered in the receiving corps. Apples to apples, I am taking Dike over Jefferson. But Jefferson is worth a stash in deeper leagues with Ridley done for the season. And because Alec Ayamater's injury is a hamstring injury, he did not appear close to practicing at all this week. So it is possible that next week it is just Dike and Jefferson. But preference is Dike. I mentioned checking waivers in last week's waiver wire stash video to see if Jayden Reed was available because he is surprisingly available in less than 40% of Yahoo leagues. I get it, because there is a lot of natural skepticism around the Packers receiving corps because of the way that the ball is spread around, making it more difficult to trust receivers in terms of their upside on a weekly basis. They can all pop off at any given moment, but it's tough to predict exactly which one of it will be in any given week because there is no clear alpha in this offense. Romeo Doubs has been reliable in terms of being a fairly safe floor, but we have seen enough of the combination of Romeo Doubs and Jayden Reed to know that the two combined results in Jayden Reed having the higher upside play to the point where Romeo Doubs literally sat out of a game out of frustration over his lack of use last year. We saw last week's breakout performance from Christian Watson. Fantastic, awesome, was excellent to see. But for the most part, he has not been a high volume receiver. He is more of a big play threat. That's not a problem, right? That is ultimately a high upside play guy who you put in your flex because there's an actual possibility of him getting you 20 to 25 fantasy points. That's great. But Reed has the ability to operate as the wide receiver 1, and the Packers need somebody to step up and operate that way in a consistent capacity there. Reed will not play this week, but he was designated to return from IR. Considering that the Packers play on Thanksgiving, it is possible they held him out from this game so that he did not have to play on a short week and have a really quick turnaround there. So this might be a really good time to just go ahead and stash him. We have talked about Cedric Tillman before. Ultimately, I do think he's the better stash between him and Jerry Jeudy, but it is tough to get around the fact that the Browns offense focuses so aggressively on the tight ends by the design of Kevin Stefanski and the fact that Dylan Gabriel truly has struggled to consistently get the ball to the wide receivers. But hence why we are stashing Tillman this week. We will not have Dylan Gabriel. We will have Shedeur Sanders. And last week was not pretty. But in his defense, right, coming in cold with no preparation throughout the week against a defense like Baltimore does not always result in pretty results. So this week he has full preparation, a friendly matchup against Vegas. Now there is a lot that has to go right. The Browns' offensive line really is not that good, and the Raiders' defensive line could absolutely take advantage of that and make it a miserable day for Sanders. But there is the possibility that he handles the pressure well, and Sanders has a fine day, and maybe it'll benefit the wide receivers. We'll see. Someone has to catch the ball for the Jets. I fully understand that it is not an appealing ad, but here's the deal. The schedule is really good, and all jokes aside, we should see an increase in pass volume with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. By no means will Taylor be out there slinging the ball, lighting it up to the tune of our boy Jacoby Brissett, right? But he will definitely be an upgrade on volume compared to Justin Fields. In his lone start of the season in Week 3 against Tampa Bay, he completed 26 of 36 attempts for 197 yards and 2 passing touchdowns, 1 interception. Technically, that is enough volume for like 4 Justin Fields starts. Okay, I said no jokes, but I guess I am joking, but kind of that's actually a little bit serious of a joke there and kind of sad. I love Justin Fields. I do, so no offense to him, but I do feel more comfortable about the pass catchers in this offense with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. With Garrett Wilson out in Week 11 last week, we saw the newly revamped Jets receiving core, if you can technically call it that. We finally saw all the Jets' new pieces together, and by new pieces, I specifically mean John Metchie and Adonai Mitchell. Now, Mitchell looked objectively awful. Yeah, I had higher hopes than that, but that was bad. I don't have any faith there, but Metchie looked good. Metchie looked good. He caught all 3 of his targets for 45 yards. He got a touchdown. He played the most snaps of anyone in the receiving core. Metchie has not made any impact in the NFL, but perhaps this is finally his time to shine because there is literally no other competition. And he was a fine prospect. He just went through significant health issues at the beginning of his career. So perhaps this is finally it. Perhaps this is his time. You could also look at Mason Taylor as well if you need a tight end. His upside has been very limited, and he has just 1 touchdown on the season. But I did mention that there are better matchups on the horizon. After Baltimore, they face Atlanta, Miami, and Jacksonville. That is an excellent stretch for anyone. Now, quick note before we move on to the playoff stashes, check waivers and see if Chris Godwin is available. Surprisingly, dropped a lot, lower rostered than you would think. And obviously that will not be consistent across leagues, so you never know. He might be out there. Check and see. He could play this week. We don't know 100% yet as of the filming of this video. Now, if you need a spot start this week, you can turn to Andrei Iosivas, but do note that while I like him a lot, he is not a stash. That is why he's not on this list, in case you were wondering, because Jamar Chase will be back next week, and it will render him, again, very useless-ish. Now on to the playoff stashes. The Dolphins have an extremely favorable rest of season schedule. They are on a bye this week. After that bye, they play New Orleans. That will be the toughest matchup that they face. New Orleans from a pass perspective. Then after that, they play the Jets, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay. Fantastic pass matchups. Now, Washington's volume has been a little underwhelming in terms of production. He's been consistently involved in the offense. He is the clear wide receiver 2. There's no question about that. But since becoming the wide receiver 2, he has had between 7 and 14 fantasy points in 5 games. He's gotten a couple touchdowns. Not bad. Not bad at all. It's just lacked a little bit of upside, but that's really all there is to it. He is the second look in the offense that will likely have an excellent volume rest of season with the fantastic playoff schedule, so that is why we want to stash him. Now, for that matter, in deep leagues, I am talking about deep leagues where you have very deep benches and you can afford to stash a player like this. Stashing Darren Waller is not the worst thing in the world, okay? Purely because of the playoff schedule. The Dolphins claim that he is expected to return this season. I don't know if I believe that claim. Well, I trust them more than Tampa Bay. I will say that. But if he doesn't return, this is why it's a deep league recommendation. I want it to be a situation where you're stashing him in a league where it doesn't matter if you never see him again, right? Now, we're stashing him potentially here in super deep leagues because I would assume that his return will result in the same type of play that he had earlier in the season. Now, when he played, he had between 9 and 18 fantasy points in 3 of his 4 games, with the 4th game being the game that he got injured. When he was healthy, he had 4 touchdowns in 3 games. It is a Hail Mary, but if he is on the field in the fantasy playoffs, he will have weekly top 12 upside easily. Now, this stash is far easier to understand here. I don't have to make an argument for it. AJ Barner has been the clear tight end 1 for Seattle this season. Now, that role has come with some inconsistencies. When you play with Jackson Smith and Jigba, obviously everything else will be inconsistent. Now, his snap count has been very consistent outside of games where he got injured. But the production, that has been a little bit inconsistent there. He's had an extremely high ceiling because he is a strong red zone presence. They're a strong red zone target. We saw that ceiling in week 5 against Tampa Bay where he caught all 7 of his targets for 53 yards and 2 touchdowns. But the downside is that his floor is legitimately 1 fantasy point, and he has hit that twice this season in healthy games. Now, we finally did see another high volume game for him. He did not get the touchdown, but it was an excellent day, so that was good to see. Good to see him put up volume without touchdowns and put up from a fantasy perspective. He had 10 receptions on 11 targets for 70 yards in week 11 against the Rams. And while inconsistency can make you a little bit nervous, the upcoming schedule is truly beautiful. We've got a good chance of him going off in this matchup this week against Tennessee, and after that, he gets Minnesota, Atlanta, Indianapolis, the Rams, the team that he just had 10 receptions against, and then championship week against Carolina. For a tight end, that is an excellent schedule. Now, here's another one that you kind of got to go with me on this one here. Darius Slayton, the Giants' playoff schedule is Washington, Minnesota, and Vegas. While I have zero interest in starting Slayton over the next couple of games, that playoff schedule is very intriguing there. Slayton missed week 11 with a hamstring injury. Prior to that, he had modest production against San Francisco and Chicago, 11 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points in PPR. Okay, that's pretty good, okay? My only concern here, and you got to hear me out on this one. It might sound silly, but hear me out. My only concern here is that Isaiah Hodgins is back, and he had a fine week, a very productive week with Slayton out last week, and we should note that he spent the bulk of his career with the Giants. He is well liked in the organization, and he would obviously have really good rapport with the interim head coach, Mike Kafka. Slayton has been a little bit shaky. You can see the frustration all over Giants fans' faces. So I would not be shocked if Isaiah Hodgins was able to literally just push him out the way. But if you have the room to stash and see, it, is worth a little ad here to see if Slayton steps in and reclaims his spot as the second look at this offense. It is worth a shot, given the playoff schedule. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also find me across all social media platforms at It's Tara Time, so make sure that you are tuned in, locked in, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff, because I'm bringing you fantasy football content all season long. Lock in. We are in here for the long haul here. Make sure that you are following, because I'm giving you waiver wire stashes, live shows, Q&As, trade, start sits, all that good stuff. You can ask me any questions and so much more.